On the morning of December 16th, 1955, a rancher and his son were hunting in Wasatch County, Utah, when they stumbled across Krystal Beslanowitch, left next to a river on top of some bloody rocks. No identification, skull completely bashed in. They immediately informed the police, who were at the scene within minutes, examining clues. After bringing her body back to the lab, an autopsy revealed her cause of death to be blunt force trauma, and she had been killed approximately 10 to 12 hours before her body had been found. The only clues and evidence they had were a ring on her finger and 3 distinct tattoos, which they released sketches of to the public in hopes of finding a possible identity. The tattoos consisted of a series of arrows on her upper left arm, a number 6 on her left hand, and 2 hearts with the name Chris above her left breast. Meanwhile, Chris had been watching the news and happened to hear about a Jane Doe who had been found in Wasatch County. He immediately recognized the tattoos and knew exactly who she was. But Chris had a problem, because Krystal had secrets. She was a sex worker, and on top of that, underage, only 17 years old. When he informed the police of her identity, he told them that she was Krystal Beslanowitch, which of course is not Krystal, so when the police went to inform the family, they told him that Tracy was fine, alive, and well, and that it must have been their stepdaughter, Krystal, who had been stealing her identity. Along with several of the rocks they had collected from the crime scene, their only 2 leads led back to Chris himself or possible DNA on the rocks. So of course, Chris, now having lied to them, was now their prime suspect. They questioned him further, where he would avoid subjects like where she went and what she was doing the night that she disappeared from him. And when he did answer, his answers were vague and could have ended anywhere, like Krystal going out to get food. Eventually, under pressure, Chris revealed to the police that he had been lying about Krystal's identity, as he wanted them to feel motivated to find the killer and not discriminate her because of her work. If Chris was going to stay their main suspect, they needed more evidence, so they looked more into their personal lives together, finding Krystal to be the main moneymaker, which would mean killing her would bring him no good. Her body was also found an hour outside of the city, and Chris didn't have a car, ruling him out of the suspect list. Once again, the police were back at step 1, stuck in another corner. Seeing as she was a sex worker, she would have connections and know many others, so the police decided to investigate any other people they could find that had knew Krystal and possibly knew where she was that night. The police had to sort a lot of information and possible evidence, but after a long time concluding everything, they found out that a local cab driver had been very infatuated with Krystal. The cab driver had told more than 5 people that if he couldn't have Krystal, no one could. Their new prime suspect was Joseph Michael Simpson, but when they ran his profile through CODIS, it came up empty. At the time that this crime was committed, CODIS database was only a few years old, meaning that when they swabbed the rocks for as much DNA as they could, they found no possible matches. Once again, they were back to square one, still trying to solve the crime. Detective Bonner, who had been working this case for 2 years now, still couldn't find any possible new suspects. Evidence they had was some foreign male DNA that was found on the rock, but it had no matches, meaning that Krystal's case went cold. Bonner, still dedicated to solving crimes, was eventually elected the Wasatch County Sheriff. 18 years after Krystal's murder, a new forensics tool had been invented, an MVAC system. It was a DNA extraction tool, originally invented to collect pathogens and improve food safety. The MVAC functioned like a mini hurricane, vacuumed up DNA that could be collected and analyzed. Sheriff Bonner, hearing about the MVAC, immediately requested one be in his sheriff's office. He then had 2 of the rocks found near Krystal's body tested, and when the results came back, they had a full DNA profile that could be put into CODIS. Seeing that they could identify or catch the suspect that murdered Krystal, Sheriff Bonner reopens the case. Once it was run through the machine, CODIS had a match: 46-year-old Joseph Michael Simpson, the cab driver. Simpson was an ex-convict who was on parole around the time Krystal was murdered, as well as he was in the area. Sheriff Bonner knew that this man had killed Krystal, but he wanted to build a solid case against him and get him back into prison. He was free and had met his parole requirements. When they went to search for Simpson, they learned that he had registered with the Sarasota County in Florida. With the help of Sarasota County, 2 detectives flew down and began surveying Simpson, watching him, waiting. Eventually he went to a drugstore and smoked a cigarette, which he had discarded. They collected the cigarette butt and brought it back to Utah. It was a match. They had plenty of DNA evidence and knew he would be convicted. When Simpson was arrested, the state crime lab asked that more DNA samples be taken from Simpson so that they could validate the earlier results. When many of the results came back positive, the case went to a trial. On September 15, 2016, for 2 weeks, the prosecution laid out DNA evidence for the jury, explaining to them how and why Simpson killed her. They also had new evidence from other inmates that claimed to have heard him say he killed Krystal. After 3 hours, the jury deliberated. Guilty. 15 days after the trial started, Joseph Michael Simpson was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.